first of all, thank you very much for the organizers of the conference for kind of inviting me and assisting me with my trip. My presentation will be about the Russian versus ethnic vernaculars. In particular, I'm looking at how Russian becomes a new language of Islam in Russia in the post-Soviet Union, and what's the reaction from the side of ethnic vernaculars. So my presentation will have the following lines. First, I will introduce a little bit what is Russian language of Islam, because it's part of my PhD research that I'm currently doing at Leiden University. And also, I will discuss two case studies, namely Tatarstan and Kazakhstan, how they react on this development. And later, there will be conclusions and some further discussion. My PhD project is a part of a bigger research project called Russian Language of Islam, which is conducted at Leiden University and Amsterdam University. And I'm very grateful for two of my supervisors, Michael Kemper and Jus Haken, for their generous feedback, and two other participants of the project, Alfred Bustanov and Dennis Karayev, for their support as well. Within my PhD research, I'm studying the language shift that now taking place in Russia and also the post-Soviet era. It's about the language shift concerns the fact that traditional Islamic vernaculars like Tatar, Bashkir, Uzbek, and Kumyk are now being replaced by a Russian language that becomes the main media of communication, of publication of Islamic literature, of sermons in the mosques, and just general Islamic thought. And Russian, as you may know, used to be primarily the language of the Orthodox Church, but now it becomes a language that serves two religions. And this happens basically due to several factors, and first of all, it's decline in native language proficiency among Muslim population, which has to do a lot with the Soviet linguistic policies. But also migration, especially in Russia, there are a lot of migration flows coming from the Central Asia, which makes the Russian the only language that everybody will understand. So you can imagine a mosque in St. Petersburg or Moscow where people from the Caucasus, Tatarstan, or Central Asia will come to listen to a sermon, Friday sermon, and Russian then will be the only language that everybody understands. So Tatar or Uzbek, that used to be the languages of this kind, cannot serve this purpose anymore. And speaking of the Russian language of Islam, at least we distinguish several variants. And first of all, just to give you some idea of what it actually means when Russian becomes the language of Islam, there are two variants. The first one is Arabism, is when a lot of Arabic loan or Persian loan words are introduced into Russian syntax and morphology, creating some kind of text which only Muslim people will understand. So it's very in-group type of text. For example, just one expression, nikabiste uktishka, is two words, nikab and ukti, both are Arabic, and you can see how they transform to fit the Russian morphology and syntax. The meaning being my Muslim sister wearing niqab. What I'm more interested is about the second variant, is namely called Russianism, which is an opposite of Arabism, where all the Arabic loan words, all the Islamic terminology is fully translated into Russian. And you have to imagine that the Russian religious vocabulary is, of course, very much connected with Christianity. So a lot of Orthodox Christian words are now changing their meaning, or at least the speakers of this variant are trying to do their best to change their meaning and introduce these words into Islamic discourse. And here I give another example of, for example, Arabic expression subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is in this variant of Russian Islamic language will be Svaton and Velik. This development, when Russian becomes the language of Islam in the federal level, is very much faced with opposition in Islamic regions of Russia. And here I will explain one particular case study, namely the Republic of Tatarstan. In 2016, the Mufti of the spiritual directorate in Tatarstan, Kamil Samigulin, suggested an amendment that all Friday sermons in the Republican mosques should be only in Tatar language, so no Russian is allowed for Friday sermons, which are considered to be the major sermons. The reasons being that Samigulin was claiming that by introducing Tatar as the only language of communication in mosques, this is the way to combat non-traditional forms of Islam, because exactly those who speak in Russian language of Islam are non-traditional forms of Islam. But also, for Tatarstan in particular, this means that by keeping language and religion together as important markers of identity, the Tatars can also Tatars can resist assimilation in the Russian society. Speaking about the influence over education, since 2016, the Mohammadi Madrasa, which is the main madrasa in the Republic, will provide all subjects exclusively in Tatar language. And Tatar language becomes also a requirement for imams who would like to work in the mosques in the Republic. At the same time, the mosques will offer language courses and courses on the history of Tatars for the visitors of mosque and also imams working in this mosque. If we speak about the consequences of such an amendment or such a reform, we have to take into account that Tatarstan is just a regional spiritual administration, and these kind of measurements will of course face a lot of contradiction from the federal spiritual administration, namely the one based in Moscow, which exactly promotes the opposite fact that Russian should become the main language of communication for Muslim people on the territory of Russia, because not everybody can speak Arabic or any of the Islamic vernaculars, and to avoid spread of non-traditional forms of Islam, we should use the language that everybody understands, including non-Muslim citizens of the country. Also, in particular for Tatarstan, this can mean that those who used to go to the mosque will stop doing that because they simply will not understand what the sermon is about. And although some mosques will offer short description of the sermon before the sermon or after, still some argue that this will exactly push Islam into underground. But also, Islamic education in the Republic will not be accessible for those who do not understand or do not speak Tatar, because all the teaching will be done in this language. The case of Tatarstan I would like to compare with the Kazakhstan, where similar developments are happening. In 2016, around the same time, in Kazakhstan, the Ministry of Religious and Civil Society Affairs was created. It was also with an aim to combat non-traditional type of Islam. But here, in contrast to Tatarstan, Kazakhstani authorities argued that they should exactly introduce Russian in order to combat non-traditional forms of Islam, because they were arguing that Kazakh language is not understandable for everyone who comes to the mosques, and those who will not go to official mosque will look for underground, non-traditional religious circles that will explain Islam for them in Russian. So therefore, they suggested that sermons should be accompanied with Russian translations if mosques are located in multi-ethnic regions of Kazakhstan. And this is part of a general state program on combating non-traditional forms of Islam, and also building a dialogue between the state and society, because this ministry is purely state creation, and thereby they try to accommodate the needs of the society. Speaking about the education, this of course will influence the teaching in the universities and certain madrasas. So there were special courses in madrasa and at the Nur Mubarak University in Almaty, where they will train imams who can speak all three languages, Arabic, Kazakh, and Russian. Also, for imams and Islamic theologians, there are special courses at the university to train them to recognize and prevent religious extremism. For those believers who already suffered from various destructive religious movements, there are special courses on rehabilitation. Speaking about the consequences, similar to Tatarstan, these kind of amendments faced a lot of criticism from the society. In the case of Kazakhstan, some Kazakh nationalists, in particular Azimbai Ali, expressed their concern that this is a return to domination of the Russian language. So the whole attempt of Kazakhstan after its independence to raise the prestige of the Kazakh language will not work. But also, the new ministry still has some overlapping duties with the Kazakhstan spiritual administration, the Kazakhstan Muftiates, and it's still not clear how these two organizations will function together. Speaking about the consequences, yes, my research concerns about the language, but I would like to see it in a broader perspective, not just in the linguistics. But for example, language is a marker of traditional Islam. As we see both in Tatarstan and Kazakhstan, there is a definite language participates in definition of traditional Islam. But we saw that these groups are very much different with competing agendas, which leads us to the idea what actually traditional Islam means, if it means something. Second, in both cases, and in Kazakhstan and Tatarstan, all reforms were top-down and faced a lot of social opposition. And this leads to the thoughts on to what extent Islamic authorities can reach to their target groups and to what extent they actually represent this target group in respective republics. But also, Russian language of Islam is very much connected with the Russian dominance, and both republics and Tatarstan and Kazakhstan struggle with that. And in this case, language and religion both become a key markers of their ethnic identity, and language being a medium to keep this ethnic identity pure and free of Russian influence. Thank you very much.